The DA is in turmoil after its new leader made some disparaging and naive remarks. Here is why. So after little more than a day of becoming the DA's new leader, Geordin Hill-Lewis made some pretty problematic statements, to say the least, and these have caused massive controversies within the media, as well as caused a lot of damage amongst a large portion of the DA's loyal voter base. Now, I've taken some time to analyze not only what he said, but also what other people have made of what he has said. And to say the least, it is very problematic, not only because the DA's foreign policy positions look questionable, but also the economic understanding of their new leader appears questionable as well. But before we get into this, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? It's entirely free, and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below. If you would like to support the channel and enjoy some additional perks, consider becoming a Power Club member. All you have to do is click on the join button below the video. Now let's get started. So initially I had my own analysis prepared, but I found an article that was written so brilliantly that I thought it important to share, and it comes from The Common Sense. Now, for those of you who might not know, The Common Sense is made by the top political analyst, Franz Cronier, as well as some of his other colleagues from the Social Research Foundation. If any of them are watching this, keep up the great work. I really enjoy what you do, and be sure everybody to follow them as well. Now, what I'm going to do in this specific article is we are going to go through it, and I am going to add my own analysis as we go along, because a lot of my analysis does overlap with what The Common Sense has written, but I do have some additional points as well. So let's begin. DA needs to up its game. The new Democratic Alliance leader has made shallow and naive comments about the war in Iran that reveal a deeper issue his party must set right if it is to be successful. So just to remind everybody what went on, there were two specific interviews that happened. The one was on Newsroom Africa, where Hill-Lewis said that he finds US President Donald Trump reprehensible, and he said that he is not a fan of MAGA and not a fan of Trump. The other issue came up in a Bloomberg interview whereby Geordin Hill-Lewis voiced his opposition to the war against Iran, calling it dubious in nature. Now, as we proceed with the article, it explains that talking to Bloomberg, which is of course the interview I'm alluding to, Lewis, who was elected as the new head of the DA over the weekend, said that the current Iran war is not achieving anything helpful or meaningful for the world. That comment reveals a naivety around global affairs that he needs to snap his party out of if it is to be taken seriously on the national, let alone global foreign policy stage. The only issue is I don't think he needs to snap the party out of it. I think he himself needs to snap out of it. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in the DA who share his sentiment, but I would also assume that there are people who disagree within the party as well. So it explains here that the strategic objectives behind the war are well understood by top thinkers. A first objective is to deny Iran the offensive capacity to threaten its neighbors and the ability to develop a nuclear weapon. That objective is being substantively met. Something I do want to add on to that, however, is that nuclear capabilities are not the only way that Iran is threatening its neighbors, as well as a lot of the Western world and even South Africa. You see, the other way that it's doing it is being the head of what is called the axis of resistance. So those of you who follow the channel will know that I've shown a map of the axis of resistance numerous times, whereby Iran is really the head of the organization, and they have proxies operating throughout the Middle East. These include Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and then other groups including the PMF in Iraq, for example, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Furthermore, there are cells of these different groups operating around the world. In fact, it is believed that there is a Hamas office in Cape Town as we speak. So it's very clear that Iran is expanding this influence throughout the world through its proxies. Carrying on with the article, the second objective is to force Europe into restoring its energy security by reinvesting in North Sea and related oil and gas. Had Europe, under green pressure, not throttled capital flows into fossil fuel investment, This newspaper estimates that it might now have produced around 15 million barrels of oil a day, roughly two-thirds of what passed through the Strait of Hormuz before the start of the current war between Israel, the United States, and Iran. Now, important to note here is that Strait of Hormuz has about 20% of global oil and gas supplies flowing through it, being shipped through it. And what's actually really interesting is that while Europe finds itself in a conundrum, the United States and Israel are not, because they actually don't rely on Persian Gulf countries to supply them with oil and gas. And so in actual fact, they are well guarded against this issue. Okay, so the third objective is to strengthen the Western liberal order broadly by forcing Europe into sourcing what oil and gas it cannot itself produce from America instead. This makes a lot of sense. Together with the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline, that eliminates much of the leverage that non-West held over the West for the past 30 years. So a lot of countries, including the UK, are very overly reliant on gas supplies and oil supplies sourced through the Strait of Hormuz. So, for example, the UK relies heavily on Qatar Energy for its LNG supplies, liquefied natural gas. Now, because of the supply chokehold, they are facing a massive energy crisis, and it is estimated that if the UK does not sort this out, they could see their energy costs rise by about 90%. But again, this could have been avoided if they weren't overly reliant on Qatari supplies. So the fourth objective here is to reorder the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific by developing leverage over Chinese oil flows. This is something that I personally am less concerned with. I think you're always going to have this kind of competition. America and the West are just not able to control and dominate everywhere, and they're always going to have one or two gaps of places where they don't have influence, where the Chinese come in. So in my view, this paragraph is not as important. It then goes on to explain how the potential for South Africa to exploit opportunities around these priorities is significant. Its Simonstown choke point has seen its already vast strategic value in anchoring control of the Indo-Pacific multiply several times over as a consequence of Hormuz. That is good for South Africa if its leaders could only learn how to exploit such geography. South Africa's untapped oil and gas potential is a second opportunity. Drill, baby, drill, as Trump says, and the country could draw vast benefit from uncertainty around Iran and Hormuz and attempts to circumvent Hormuz dependency. Trade that geography, and the oil flows between East and West, so China and America, and South Africa could extract sufficient investment concessions to lift its growth rate to 4% of GDP on foreign capital inflows alone. So just to provide some context, at this moment in time, South Africa's GDP is hovering just above 1%, which is very bad. A lot of the political parties in the GNU like to paint it in a bright picture, saying, oh, actually GDP growth has improved since the GNU. And yes, that may be true, but that's not the full picture. In reality, it's an improvement, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be, especially with inflation rising almost to the 3% level. Ultimately, 4% is in line with a lot of developing nations which are rapidly building their economies and improving in that sense. And so ultimately, if South Africa could get 4% GDP growth, that would be very encouraging for the country. So we're now going to move on to another problematic situation, which is actually the economic side of things. Now, Hill-Lewis actually has a master's degree in economics, and he has studied in the UK as well as South Africa. So this is supposed to be a highly educated individual. Still, although he's got the qualification, it's important to note that he's never actually held a normal job before. He's only ever worked in the DA, and he was a DA activist since high school. So ultimately, this is somebody who does not have any real-world experience, and given his economic analysis, it shows. So as explained here, Hill-Lewis repeated the idea that oil prices are extremely high and thus doing great global harm. That is wrong. At around $100, oil prices are in line with their inflation-adjusted averages. Global growth forecasts are largely unchanged from 2025, as this newspaper again reported yesterday. Markets are very high relative to a year ago, as we report again this morning. So what's actually important to note is that at the time of writing, the oil prices were around $100, but at the time of recording this video, which is a few days later, oil prices have actually since come down. Continuing with the article, markets are very high relative to a year ago, as we report again this morning, and even the rand is stronger than 12 months ago. Again, therefore, an ignorant statement from someone who has not been properly briefed. At well over $100, the global growth and market outlook changes, as it does if the $100 level is held too deep into 2026. But for now, serious people know that the global and markets outlook is still sound. And there's another important point that I want to attach to this. So as people have been seeing that there is a supply problem coming out of the Straits of Hormuz, they have already been planning around this reality. First of all, what people need to understand, and I'm somebody who's been an oil and gas reporter for about 5 years now, is that when consumers buy oil, so if a country decides to buy oil from another supplier that has to ship it through the Straits of Hormuz, they don't buy exactly what they need at this moment in time. They plan ahead and they build their stockpiles. So, for example, if South Africa desperately needed an oil lift of 10 cargoes today, they're not going to go and rush to a supplier and say, my goodness, we need 10 oil lifts right now, please get it to us. No. They've already got the oil stockpiles to cover those lifts. What South Africa instead will be buying is supplies that they need in the future. And so ultimately, yes, prices have fluctuated quite badly, but that is because of oil supplies that are going to be bought now with the crisis in place. Many countries have stockpiles for weeks and even months. The other thing that's important is that many are making plans around this. For example, while fuel was expected to skyrocket in price this month in April, what the South African government did in order to limit the increase was to actually reduce the fuel levy. So effectively the fuel taxes that are paid to the government. So in actual fact, there are mechanisms around this. What's also interesting is how many countries are making alternative plans with other suppliers. So India, for example, used to get a lot of its oil and gas supplies from the Persian Gulf suppliers. But what they've actually done is they've been increasing supplies from Guyana. For those of you who are not familiar, Guyana is a South American country on the northern tip of South America. And so their oil shipment routes actually come through the Atlantic Ocean. They don't go through the Strait of Hormuz. And so India, by sourcing an alternative supplier, has been able to keep their supplies constant. And so ultimately, what Hill-Lewis doesn't realize is that there are so many ways to mitigate this disaster. And clearly, I'm sorry to say, Hill-Lewis exhibits a severe lack of understanding, not only of economics, but of the realities of the oil and gas sector. Moving on with the article, it explains here, Hill-Lewis comes across as unserious, something that was brutally exposed in the government's decision earlier this week to appoint Rolf Meyer as the country's ambassador to Washington. For those of you who might not know, Cyril Ramaphosa decided to appoint Meyer as the new US ambassador. He was a former National Party member, but has since been an ANC member. So that decision, the article explains, read against Hill-Lewis's comments, has in a sense inverted the balance of power between the DA and the ANC in Washington. The ANC, because that is in practice what it is, has sent a well-regarded serious actor to the American capital, while the DA has sent a very different caliber of message. Now, I know that a lot of people do have the issues with Rolf Meyer, and I do understand it. But what they need to understand as well is that the United States doesn't view him in the same way that a lot of local people, and especially Afrikaners, view him. The United States does view him as a little bit more of a palatable person. He does show a lot of good people skills. He is sociable. He is very diplomatic. And he obviously, from just the surface, is not the kind of person who is going to be controversial like an Ibrahim Rasool or even Mcebisi Jonas, who has criticized Trump and insulted him on many occasions. So, as explained in the concluding paragraph, that is the real issue here. To be a serious player, on not just the national but also the international stage. The DA needs to think and understand the world as well as the best analysts do. Too often it is pedestrian, and its leaders therefore come across as chancers who, while doing a very good and important thing in helping the ANC and the government of national unity, in effect stumbled up to a station where they don't really belong. Now, I understand there are going to be a lot of people who are upset with my analysis here, but we need to face facts. With his comments, Geordin Hill-Lewis has shown that firstly, he does not understand the Middle East as well as international relations and the global implications that they have. Secondly, he is showing a lack of economic understanding, which is highly problematic given his very high university qualifications. But again, as I said, this is a career politician who's never held down a job outside of politics. He does not understand how businesses work. I'm also really shocked to see how he really just doesn't understand the oil and gas sector. And yes, not everybody does, that's fair, but this is somebody who has the aspiration as a DA leader to potentially be the future president of South Africa. And oil and gas is one of those very crucial industries that anybody who wants to be president should be able to understand. Yes, we can't be specialists at everything, but there should be certain priorities, and the energy sector is one. Ultimately, other political parties, such as the Patriotic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus, have been a lot smarter when it comes to these sorts of international relations. You see, the Patriotic Alliance released a press release early on in the war in which they supported both the United States and Israel, and they confirmed their support while condemning Iran for its wrongdoings and the instability it has caused to the region. The Freedom Front Plus leader, Corné Mulder, has also launched a scathing attack against Geordin Hill-Lewis, whereby Corné Mulder actually explained how the DA leader has been very irresponsible with his comments, and that while you don't have to like Donald Trump, you do need to understand that insulting him and calling him reprehensible is not a good move. People from Washington will see your comments online, and they are going to view it distastefully. Ultimately, South Africa needs to mend its relationship with the US, especially given that the US is not only a critical trade partner, but the US also provides more companies in South Africa and more jobs to South Africans than any other foreign entity. They are crucial to the success of South Africa. And ultimately, the DA will lose, while the Freedom Front Plus and the PA gain from this experience. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you found it informative, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.